Are you looking to save money and you're starting out from nothing and you want to save some money quickly just so you can have either some investment fund available or so that you can have an emergency fund or for whatever purpose it is that you're looking to save some money? Well, here I'm going to tell you about how I saved my first 10,000. Welcome or welcome back to Ira Living. I'm Kenya, and today I'm going to share with you the steps that I took in order to save my first £10,000. The first strategy that I implemented was monitoring my spending. Now, there are some people who are spending and they have no idea what they're spending each month, where they're spending it, how they're spending it, and how much they're spending. And some people are spending way beyond their means, and they're constantly finding themselves in overdraft or having to use their credit card. I was the person who was always wanting to be committed to saving, but each time I start to try and accumulate some savings, for some reason that money was being spent. And so I was at the point where I was absolutely fed up. I was fed up of not being able to accumulate or to save some money. So I decided that I was going to be starting to be more intentional about my process. So the first thing I started to do was to monitor my spending, because I was so far in overdraft and I didn't want to stay in that place anymore. So I started to monitor the monies that I was spending, where I was spending it, how I was spending it. And then I started to implement, as a result, step number 2, which was intentional spending. So now I started to be a little bit more intentional about my spending. So some of the things that I did, for example, was instead of going to the supermarket every week, I started to go to the supermarket every other week. I found that what that then did is the money I would have spent normally over every 2 weeks, I spent less of it now when I went to the supermarket once in a fortnight. And therefore, I also realized that there was less waste in my household. And so those monies I was able to put aside and start to save. I was also intentional in the other things I bought, because I had a closet full of clothing, some of which I wasn't even wearing. So what I decided to do in my intentional spending is to stop myself from spending on buying more clothing. And unless I was getting rid of clothing and absolutely needed to replace them, I did not go out to shop for any other clothes. So I look at other ways. So for example, entertainment. I try to minimize the amount of entertainment I did, and also the amount of takeaways and takeout that I was getting, because I knew that I needed to hit my target, and my intentional spending is what was going to help me as one of the means to get me there. Step number 3 that I took was being more generous with my money. Now you might think, why am I going to be generous if I'm actually trying to save? Now, for somebody who had been able to be generous throughout my 20s and into my early 30s, generosity was not a difficulty for me. So what it was about prioritizing where and when I was going to be generous, and not just be generous because people want stuff and I feel like, oh, I can afford to give it, because this I can afford to give it was now bringing me into overdraft. So I needed to first of all look at how strategic I was being with my generosity. Am I giving people things because they actually need it, or am I just giving people things because they want it and they know if they ask me they will get it? The other area of my generosity that I look at is I believe in tithing, and therefore I decided that I was going to be more strategic where this was concerned. And my first payment that I was going to make each month out of my earning was tithing. Now for me, what I experienced from that is that my money seemed to go a lot further every month, and some of the things that I buy seemed to be so much more durable than they were before, and I needed to spend a lot less on certain repairs that I would have usually spent more on previously. And for me that worked, because that is what I believe, and therefore it is what I practiced. The fourth thing that I did was I became very conscious about the need to clear my debt. And so what I started to do was I started to use the extra money that I was now having in my account each month to try and pay down my debt. And one of the first areas I started with was with my overdraft. And each time I clear a certain level of my overdraft, I would contact my bank and ask them to reduce my overdraft limit to that. That was me saying clearly and categorically that I am not going to go further into my overdraft for whatever reason. And so I was closing any door of opportunity to me having that money to be able to use. And I worked that process and that program until I got down to zero as my overdraft. Now, when I got to this point, it was where I then started to do mindful saving. So what I did was I opened up a savings account and I tried to find one that had a high yielding savings interest rate. And therefore, that's what I went with. What I then did was I automated my savings, pretty similar to how I did it before. But in this case, when I was automating my savings, I made sure that it was in such a way that it was not something that I was going to be easily able to access. And therefore, I would not be able to transfer money out of it at any given point in time. Also, what I then realized was that I had a tax rebate. And usually I would spend that money on many different things because these are things that I feel like I needed to spend the money on. What I did this time was I decided none of that is going to happen and I'm going to reward myself. All of these sacrifices that I've made up to this point to try and save this money that I've now gotten into my possession is going to be treated in just the same way, because this whole strategy helps to build up this discipline that you know that this is what you're going to be doing and this is why you are doing it. So now I put this money into the same savings account along with the other money that I was saving. And therefore, before I knew it, over time, I was then able within a year to be able to hit my target of my £10,000. Now, because I was being very diligent about it, I was able to achieve that target of saving that 10,000. And there, from the point in time where I opened that savings account and started saving in it, it took me a year to get to the point where I saved my first £10,000. If I was able to do it, so can you. And therefore, remember, financial literacy can be revolutionary. It has transformed my life, and I believe that it can do the same to yours.